us. Please do kindly indicate.
Yes, we can. We can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Aha, thank you so much. So this event will be recorded
No,
for...
I hear your voice is very strange.
My voice starts...
I can't hear you.
Is it better right now? Someone said my voice started fading. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Chica.
Okay.
It's
Sorry,
very strange.
we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So we will be recording this event just for learning and archival purposes. We will upload on our YouTube channel at the end of the proceedings.
Recording in progress.
Once again, thank you so much for joining this commemorative event in honor of our fallen colleague, Dr. Edward Nanbigne. I would like to introduce the chairperson of this event, in the person of Professor S. Sutherland Addy. Professor Sutherland is Associate Professor of African Studies at the University of Ghana. Her main research interests are written and oral literature, women's literature, educational and cultural policy. Her current research project, entitled Oral Traditions and Expressive Diversity, involves the collection and digitization of Ghanaian oral traditions. She has over 60 publications, including women writing in Africa, in West Africa and the Sahel, edited with Aminata Dao. Professor Sutherland Addy was Deputy Minister for Tourism and Culture in 1986 and Higher Education in 1986-1993 in the Republic of Ghana. Professor Sutherland Addy is Academic Associate Director, Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, Uganda for the African Humanities Program of the American Council of Learned Societies. Professor Sutherland's civil society activities lie in the areas of higher education, girls' education, children, Pan-Africanism, culture, and public space. She has served on several national and international boards, including the Ghana Commercial Bank, Open Society for West Africa, the Commonwealth of Learning, and the Board of Trustees. Am I back on air? Dr. Frehewat?
Yes, Dr. Imba, you're
Okay,
back on
thank
air.
you. Thank you so much.
Yes, you are.
Okay. As I was saying, Professor Sutherland served on several national and international boards, including the Ghana Commercial Bank, Open Society for West Africa, the Commonwealth of Learning, and the Board of Trustees of the Voluntary Fund for Technical Cooperation of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights. She currently chairs the Forum of African Women Educationalists, the Ghana section, Afram Publications Ghana Limited, and the Panafest Foundation. She is also on the board of advisors for the industry program on the preservation of Africa's audiovisual media assets, Broadcast Media Africa, and a member of the board of Monfra Foundation with executive responsibilities. We are honored to have Professor Sutherland chair this event. Thank you, Professor Sutherland.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that lengthy introduction. Good morning, everyone. We are here for a fairly solemn occasion, but hopefully also a very enlightening one that will help us to understand what Dr. Edward Nanbigne had been involved in, but also give us some perspective on the kind of research that's going on in the Institute of African Studies. As we all know, or many of us know, Dr. Edward Nanbigne was the head of religions and philosophy, and his parent section was the language, literature, and drama section. And we have known him for doing a lot of collaborative work. We've known that a lot of his research has to do with looking at narratives, especially counter narratives to the hegemonial ones in various societies, looking at issues of resistance, looking at issues of continuity and change in modern Ghana. And he has worked not only in his own area, which is from his own roots, which are Dagaba roots, but worked in almost every part of Ghana, and stretched across multidisciplinary fields, working in both the social sciences and the arts. We will hear from our colleagues about the details of this work. I think that before we start, we should probably observe a moment's silence. So if we could all rise in memory of Dr. Edward Nanbigne. Thank you. Right, so we will give our panelists within 10 minutes to try and work within 10 minutes. Only Dr. Osman has the right to go beyond that. So if we can work within 10 minutes. We're going according to this order. Dr. Moses Nino Dote, Mr. Luanga Sonsori, Dr. Samuel Ntewusu, and then Dr. Osman Al-Hassan. So Dr. Moses Nino Dote is the head of the music and dance section. And so I just will introduce you that briefly, although I don't know if people know that he's an instrumentalist, worked with the National Symphony Orchestra, runs a choir, runs a farm. What else do you do? Yeah, and his interest in research is very, very broad also. And so I'm excited to give him the mic at this point in time. Dr. Nidote.
Thank you very much, Professor Sutherland. So I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Edward Nanbigne, both to teach and to undertake a number of joint research projects for many years until the very time of his untimely death. The most intriguing of those joint research efforts, perhaps, was the one on the performance arts of insult, which earned as the accolade Insultants, courtesy of Dr. Kambon. The idea behind our interest in that controversial subject then was to focus on the formulaic conventions and the profusion of metaphors and other aesthetic features of language that often characterized both ritualized and adversarial uses of verbal and nonverbal insults. And also to argue that insulters need not be seen just as social misfits, but also as performance artists. But for the objective of today's roundtable, however, I wish to focus on what I consider as Eddie's pet project, through which he made enormous contributions to the collection of folk tales, enormous contributions to IAS research mandate in terms of the supply of research equipment, video footage to the archive, and also publications. And that is the collection of folk tales all over the country with the sole objective of safeguarding the intangible heritage in the face of rapid socio-cultural changes and urbanization. In a fieldwork-oriented academic career that spans close to 2 decades, Edward literally traveled the length and breadth of the country, often in his own car, to record staged storytelling sessions in parts of Volta region, Western region, the Savannah zone, Upper East and Upper West region of Ghana. The most recent of the folktale collection project, actually, which a number of us are involved, is dubbed the Oral Narratives and Expressive Diversity, sponsored by the Mellon Foundation and coordinated by Professor Sutherland and Edward. Okay, thank you. And Eddie followed his passion even across the northern border of Ghana, among the Dagaba and Burkina Faso. In his response to Professor Sutherland's question as to what motivated him and the best way to ensure the folk tales he collected, to share the folk tales he collected with the rest of the world, Edward intimated, and I quote, "In addition to the cataloging that we hope to create and the publications I am hoping that people, animators can dig into this collection and begin to create animations, either cartoons, and I mean paper, books ones, or video cartoons with these stories. Because it's wealth that should not be left lying in the corner. We need to be able to disseminate it for children to pick up an interest in it again. Not just children, even adults. And get to know that, yes, stories are there not just for entertainment. They are also not there just for didactism. That is to teach moral lesson as we find in schools. Every story has a moral lesson. Look, there are stories that do not have a moral lesson, but can we consider that these are also ways of keeping lexical items of the language alive? There are lexical items that we don't use in everyday speech, but they exist in storytelling. There are even animals that are no longer around. They are extinct, and yet we find them in folk tales. There are geographical features that don't exist in areas again, and yet we find them in stories. So you begin to wonder, Did those geographical features exist before? Definitely yes. Otherwise, we should not have stories about them. So the stories are a history. They are a compendium of geography, the geography of the people. They are the language of the people. I can bet that if you collect 100 stories from any community, you have all the lexical items of that community. Unquote. This was through a conversation with Professor Sutherland on the 17th of December last year, 2021, on the very day he turned 60. So because I have 10 minutes, I'm jumping. In the last few years before his death, Edward started fresh conversations about giving recognition to newer African tales, a literary category which legitimately fits postmodernist perspective because it represents a reaction against the epistemic certainty about the form and meaning of traditional African tales. As a hint to what he intended, Edward intimated again passionately, I don't mind Anansi driving a BMW now instead of walking. After all, he too must change. In the same vein, he also argued for intellectual interest in what he calls post-proverbials, a domain that seems to question the general fixation on proverbs reference to creative imageries and symbols of antiquity to be authentic. His initial contentions were against the idea that proverbs must necessarily emerge from general culture rather than being written by a single author. Now, I wish to issue this disclaimer, though, that I do not purport at all to have fully comprehended all these grandiose ideas beyond the explanations that he himself proffered. Unfortunately, Edward was yet to test or prove them through research and publication before his untimely death. In conclusion, while the above described intellectual, and for want of a better word, let me call them adventurisms, might seem rather audacious to the field of oral literature, their basic import are not in doubt at all. First of all, his idea is to safeguard endangered folk tales traditions in the country. But more importantly, it was also to encourage their conversion into new media-friendly forms for a wider spread and consumption. Finally, it was also to advocate for the perception of the field of oral literature, not just as one that studies the frozen past, but rather an active one that encourages creativity and legitimation of new oral literary forms, including proverbs, tales, through research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nidote, and I'm sure that when we open the forum up, maybe people will have questions. I mean, you didn't do the insults enough, so we have to deal with that. Okay, so now we're going to move to Luanga Sonsori, a doctoral student who spent time working with Dr. Nanbigne in the field. And I had thought that it would be a good idea for him to share that kind of experience. Mr. Sonsori, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Prof. Before I start, I would like to say that the passing of Dr. Nanbigne, for me, made me feel like I lost my father twice. And I say this because he knew my father. They were friends from when they were young. about my age from high school days. And unfortunately, my father passed last year in October, and then now he passed too. So in many ways, and also because of the relationship I had with him, in many ways it feels like my father died twice. But anyway, my first encounter with him actually was when I came to the institute, to study for my master's degree sometime in 2018. And he knew me, of course, but I didn't know him. It was only over time that we got to know each other, and then he expressed to me how much he knew me, knew my father, and all of that. But essentially, my relationship with him in terms of research began when I went into his office one time just to seek advice on a thought that I had in mind. I knew that the institute runs, an MA program and an MPhil program, and you, as a student, needed to pass certain credits before you can do the MPhil. But I wanted to find out from him if it was possible to pass and qualify to do an MPhil, but yet opt to do an MA. And the reason why I wanted to do this was I thought that if I could at least reduce the amount of time I'm going to spend in school, that would be good, because I knew that I also wanted to do a PhD. So I asked him, and then he said, yeah, that's possible. Just make sure that you actually indeed qualify to do an MPhil. And I said, okay, if that's the case, fine. Then I explained to him that I'm interested in doing something, drawing on the slave narratives from northern Ghana. My work was largely a methodological experiment where I wanted to sort of valorize and test the authenticity of oral narratives against the written record. So, I knew, of course, that a lot of work had been done on, the slave narratives, remembering just in the context of Wa and the Upper West region, Ivor Wilkes' famous book, Wa and the Wala, Wa and His People by J.C. Dogger, and so many other works, Giture's, an introduction to the Mole-speaking community. So I thought that, these works had done a very excellent, reconstruction of this history that seemed to be very important to the people. So I wanted to show if the authentic record, so-called, resides in the secondary literature, how are the people themselves whose ancestors lived this history, how are they preserving their memory, their past and all of that. So basically that was what my work was interested in. And he said, yeah, I'm already doing some work along those lines. I'm gathering all these slave narratives and so on and so forth. So of course you can come on board. And that's how come, we went to the field together. And he'll come to me every morning at home and then pick me from home after having a conversation with my father. Not very fruitful anyway, because at the time he was sick and his recollection was bad. So, but I used to have a conversation shortly, and then we hop off on the road, and then go to the various places that we needed to gather data. And it was a very flexible experience. I remember very well how he just organizes interviews in a non-structured manner, definitely. And it is very easy to be carried away and forget that you're actually on the field trying to gather data. So on the first encounter, he was like, yeah, so are you taking notes? Are you recording what's happening? Because this is actually the interview that has begun like that. And at the time, we were with the Sankana chief or ruler, and then, he had tried to, customarily give them water. So we're drinking beer somewhere at a bar. He was like, yes, this is actually the interview, so make sure you try to gather as much information as possible. And definitely it was a very healthy engagement that led to a lot of results. And I must say that I definitely learned a lot from, going to the field with him. And ultimately he was my supervisor as well. So, I went to the field with him, I wrote, he read my work, and that's how it went until I was able to submit my thesis. It got graded and all of that, and everything really went on well. And his style is really very, I want to shift, because the memories are a lot on the field, but I'll just try to shift to focus on a few things that I want to highlight about his style and then the kind of relationship I had with him. And I'd like to read an excerpt from the celebrated Ugandan poet Okot Pabetek, in terms of how he relates what time is supposed to be like in the Black experience. And I'm especially interested in how Dr. Nanbigne, related to time, in his life. And I think that in some ways this excerpt sort of expresses how he engaged time, in his daily affairs. It goes, "Time has become my husband's master. It is my husband's husband. My husband runs from place to place like a small boy. He rushes without dignity. I do not know how to keep the white man's time. My mother taught me the way of the Acholi. When the baby cries, let him suck milk from the breast. There is no fixed time for breastfeeding. When the baby cries, give him milk. Children in our homestead do not sleep at fixed times. When sleep comes into their head, they sleep. When sleep leaves their head, they wake up. When a child is dirty, give him a wash. You do not first look at the sun. In the wisdom of the Acholi, time is not stupidly split up into seconds and minutes. It does not flow like beer in a pot that is sucked until it's finished. It does not get finished like vegetables in a dish." And he definitely did exude some of this, unstructured relationship to time, and how he put events in the eternal stream of time. I mean, time exists whether we use it to do stuff or not. So Dr. Nanbigne found his way with time in a very interesting way. I remember one example, in relationship to the field. We were coming back from Sankana one time, and we were having a conversation about the day's events. And the conversation was so deep that he definitely forgot that he was supposed to leave me off at my home before proceeding to Wa. So we drove all the way to Wa, and then when he realized we were like, oh, I didn't know we passed by Loho because that's where I lived. And that's like about 10 to like 5 kilometers away. So he was like, so what do we do now? I have to take you back. I said, don't worry. I mean, I have a home in Wa as well, or I can even go back to Loho. And that's just the way it was. Just like, you see, sometimes you don't know, you just forget that you have to do certain things, and then, he just made a joke over it, and then that was it. So I got off and then said goodbye to him, and then, I went away. So I think that that's an interesting, way of relating to many of the ways that he sort of structured his activities according to the grind of time. One other thing too that I want to highlight about Dr. Nanbigne's persona has to do with, the kind of person he was. I think he traversed both worlds of the academy and then, the indigenous milieu of information. And in the Palgrave book of African philosophy, Toyin Falola has an input over there. He talks about the ritual archives, and then he makes a distinction between the organic intellectual and the traditional intellectual. So essentially, we those in this room are supposed to be the traditional intellectuals, and the organic intellectuals are the ones back at home that Dr. Nanbigne definitely developed a very healthy relationship with, drawing all the folk tales and what have you, that he used to gather from the field. So the ways of knowing of the organic intellectual are very much unlike the ways of knowing of we, the traditional intellectuals. And then, the paradigms of our understanding as it relates to knowledge seem to be at variance with what we all seem to be dealing with. So, Toyin Falolo tries to show that there needs to be, a kind of interaction that is fruitful and holistic in a way that ultimately deals with the issues that both the organic intellectual and then the traditional intellectual are both interested in, but approach, for different reasons, and at different junctures. And I definitely think that Dr. Nanbigne espoused a familiarity with both worlds, and he was able to traverse between both worlds very seamlessly in a way that I thought was an exciting thing to take note of. And in the final analysis of his research, I thought that hopefully, if he stayed around a little bit much longer, it would have been interesting to see how he would have ended up theorizing and using the material that exists in the so-called ritual archives, as Toyin Falola speaks about, to unearth and develop important, theoretical, and epistemological frameworks that are going to be useful for analyzing the raw information that abounds, across the length and breadth of our field of research, his field of research, just to make sure that there's a composite relationship, because very often, scholars talk about how people, how people go to take, theories from the so-called West and then try to apply them to raw information that exists in a different context. And then it seems to be like fitting a square peg or whatever it's usually said in a round hole, that kind of a thing. And that is definitely not organic in the sense of the word. So I think that it would have been interesting to see that his research traversed, if he had a longer life, and was finally able to get off from the field, with the tons of information that he would have gathered, to begin to make some of these kinds of interpretations, in order to advance scholarship on the African continent. So in many ways, I think that Dr. Edward Nanbigne is definitely not gone. And if I understand the importance of this, in terms of the fact that the human being really never dies, and that I see him as somewhat of a father figure, then it means that at some rate, I can be a continuation of all that he represented, to extend what his influence was supposed to have been in scholarship beyond where he stopped at it with, And it was interesting that, I heard at yesterday's event where they said he'd often say something must kill a man, and whatever it is that did kill him, there's also a contradictory sort of statement that is very popular in the circles of young people in the Upper West region, where we say Dagao Pire, and this translates to the Dagao never dies. So essentially, it's interesting to balance these two, and for me, preferably, I think that Dr. Edwin Nanbigne as the quintessential Dagao is truly not dead, and then it behooves all of us in this room, and we those on the panel here most especially who had that relationship with him, to continue to advance the scholarship that he truly loved. And I would like to end with a quote from the Murid Master Ajami poet Musa Ka, where he says, "If there were no writer, our paths would fade away. If there were no reader, our knowledge would vanish. If there were no awakener, our people would be in slumber, and they would never be awake until they are ruined." And that is the work of we scholars in this time, to make sure that we and the rest of those who are outside of academia are not ruined. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wanga. Okay, so we are going to move to another colleague, collaborator, Dr. Samwelin Teusu, the head of History and Politics section, and our great archivist. He's a proponent, please, he's a proponent of going beyond the surface and digging in, and he's dug into archives all over the world and all over the country. I think Dr. Nanbigne must have found that quite intriguing in terms of, validating his work and so on. So let's hear you, Dr. Ntivusu.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity. It's quite interesting for a historian to collaborate with somebody who is into literature. But for me, I rather learned a lot from that kind of collaboration. Because it appears I will always bring the data, and then we all sit and see how to go about it. And it takes less than 5 to 10 minutes for him to be able to establish a structure for a paper. And every now and then, I just keep asking, so all this knowledge, where did you get it from? Essentially, our collaboration led to the production of book chapters and articles. The key areas that we collaborated included transport history, chieftaincy, slavery, military history, and mining. Now with transport, the whole idea began when, as usual, we're having some important elbow exercise. And then the life story of his father came up. So the father worked with the military. And that the father at another point in time drove for the PNT, the postal services. And for me, these were key areas in my PhD research. So I then said, what can we do? So we began thinking of what we could do together. Then he said, why don't we write about this emerging transport issue, which has to do with tricycles, at which time in why it was called Nyabalori. I don't know, it's like transport of embarrassment or something, because it was a poor that actually patronized it. In Tamale, it was Sobinyadaga, it's somebody injured. So I kind of said, okay, this will be a very interesting study. And of course, having stayed and schooled in Tamale, he said, now let's begin with Tamale before we go to War. So we started our research in Tamale, and a paper came out. One interesting thing that came out of the research was this whole misrepresentation of transport systems, where the assumption is that people of the North are associated with, say, bicycles because of poverty. Actually, in the paper, we found alternative explanation, which is that the geographical terrain was very favorable to that kind of transport. It was also a kind of protest against the monopolization of horse-drawn transport, which was reserved for the elite, particularly the chiefs. So with this kind of history, we're able to do a projection that if this was a kind of protest against elite monopolization of transport, then it meant that any form of transport that will be cycle-based will gain acceptability immediately in the northern part of the country. And true to this projection, when Yellow or Mama Kambu came and then it was introduced in the north, it took out taxi transport. So certainly we could have been very good consultants to the government on issues of transport. Then we moved to also do something on chieftaincy. And this was an effort between myself, Dr. Moses Nidote, and then Dr. Edward Nanbigne. we're looking at the whole issue of migrant chiefs in Accra. And we took a particular person, Chief Brimer, who was so much liked by both the Ga and the colonial administration. So we wanted to know why a migrant would be so liked by both the colonial administration and then the Ga. You can perfectly understand that the meaning as to why a migrant chief will gain acceptability in Accra was really the effort that came from Dr. Nidote. But Dr. Nanbigne has also done a lot of work on migrant miners. And so with this kind of understanding about migrants, he immediately could link up why the colonial administration will also be interested in somebody such as Chief Brimer. The issue of passing on policies and directives was one of the key factors. But of course, another factor was the kind of tension that had arisen within that period between the colonial administration and the Ga, who refused to pay taxes. And so there was a need for an alternative way of raising revenue. And in this case, Chief Brimer was actually favored. Of course, the issue of urban planning and urban implementation of urban policies was also a contributory factor. So far, these are the two papers that we wrote together, but we have several other drafts, which is just difficult to talk about because the whole issue of Nyaba Lorry, you know, now I don't know how to follow through that because he really knew very well. Incidentally, that's his area, but we've not been able to deal with that. It is my hope to get other collaborators and then we, in the name of Nanbigne, be able to complete the research. Also, we began a project on mining. And with that one too, we have not been able to publish anything out of it yet, but we'll also see how to continue with it. We had the idea of also writing a history of the Cambonsi, which is this kind of military unit in Dagbon. I think they are the Sapashinama. We felt that that was very important because from about 1744, there was a kind of military exchange between the Dagombes and Ashanti. This was as a result of threats from Achim, and the frequent encounters between Ashanti and Achim never resulted in any kind of decisive victory, even though we have evidence of Ashanti victory and Achim victory. Now from the records, it became evident that most of these wars occurred during the rainy season, and therefore gunpowder became a little bit unproductive because of it getting wet. So Ashanti decided to rely on Dagbon to supply them with archers. And they settled among Asantis. And today they've become Akanis. In the same way, in the northern part of the country, we had a group of also military officers that were also sent into Dagbon. And they became very important in redefining the military activities among the Dagomba. Today, they have a very unique culture that reflects their identity and origin in terms of they are sitting on stools and then they are wearing of kente. We did this with Professor Amwalabi, and so we are still to continue with that. So this is a little historical journey between myself, Dr. Dr. Nidote and Dr. Edward Nanbigne. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. As I indicated at the beginning, I was hoping that the scope of work that's going on in the Institute will become apparent to us through this panel. And we're going to pass on to another perspective, another aspect of the collaboration between Dr. Edward Nanbigne and his and colleagues in the Institute. And we're going to go to Dr. Osman Al-Hassan to give us some more information.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my fellow panelists who have spoken already. And I have often said, even when Edward was alive, that I wish I could be all-rounded as he was, because one good quality he had was the fact that in many instances he would approach you first. I came here a year and a half before him, but we had a common destiny. We had, I had 2 kids at the primary school. He had 2 kids also. And so every day, apart from being together at the corridor, exactly, we would go for lunch and then we would pass to pick the kids. On some few occasions, we did communicate in such a way that somebody else can pick the other, and they'll just bring the kids to the old building or to the new building. And because when you let them out of the office, the next moment they are running all over the corridor, disturbing others, you know, we always used to lock them inside. So based on that, and the fact that his research also had dealt, his PhD had dealt on migration, there was this migration project that Professor Chuamanu was, investigating as a lead investigator, and then asked me to assist as a supervisor. And so we were looking at Ghana's migration profile, and the other supervisors at a lower level. I was the general supervisor. The other supervisors at the general level were, relatively younger people, Peter Na, Gwendolyn Kwe. And so Professor Chua, I talked to Professor Chua that Eddie has knowledge and he will be involved. And we talked about the fact that, but the position assigned is not something that we can give to him. I said I'll talk to him. So I went and talked to Eddie. Say that, you should, I don't know whether you will take this position as supervisor. We want you to go up to the north, Tamale and Yendi and Gushegu, and collect, details of people who've migrated to the north for some time, then interview households. You would have 6, research assistants, and they were trained in Accra here at the University of Ghana, and they sent them to the north. I was just wondering how to tell him, but when I said that we were going to Yendi, he said, I would even do this for nothing. And it's a learning process. Indeed, at the end of it, the group he went with, he had never known them except the few times he was involved at the training program. The students did tell us that he was the nicest person to be with. And that, the research went very well, and they gathered so much data, and they were friendly to everybody because Edward would always reach out to anybody. And I don't know whether I'm told, so I told you later in the years, because this was in 2004, later on around 2009, when we went to Yendi, Tamale, on this security needs assessment protocol, isn't it? Yeah, led by Prof. Yanka, they kept asking me, so where is that your other northern friend who couldn't speak Dagbani, but he could speak Hausa, and he made us, and generally Yendi is typically native, it's Dagbani. There are very few people from Yendi who really, they don't make a conscious effort to speak Hausa. That's one kind of thing, not that they can. So a lot of them don't understand. And when they do, they don't speak. And so they said Eddie acted as a stranger, but he told me he knew. Upon first instance, when he realized that they don't want engaging in Hausa, and he couldn't also speak Dagbani, he would always smile at them, and the next time he's speaking Hausa. So he got a response in Hausa from, you know, women, men, children alike, you know, who would have held back. And that was the first impression I got about the fact that this is really a researcher. And he's reached out to people in Yendi. When I went there, they were there for about 3 weeks. I went for 5 days to see how the work was going on. And all over they were telling me how nice he was and how he made them talk even when they were reluctant to talk. And I think that is the mark of you know, a researcher. In the same way, he and I, very young consultants, we were hired by some NGO from the UK, Mrs. Nantokma. There was a military officer who, the wife, had this NGO she called the Women's Development Agency. And so we're supposed to help in the training of this Kayaye who had come, you know, from the north. You know, I was comfortable with them because 90% of them would speak Dagbani, Mampurli, or Nanung, and it's literally the same. And so we went there, and the guy who was the lead consultant had designed this elaborate tool, and there was nobody to interpret it. He was relying on us. So we went, and Eddie said, I don't speak Dagbani, but the way you've done this, we cannot start this session until somebody, you know, translates this into language that your respondents or your participants can understand. So that was the first time we had a fracas. And then he was like, you guys, you are new. You are now coming to tell me, the consultant, what to do. You know, and Eddie said, it's obvious. The next day, by the time Eddie was, you know, interacting with a few of these girls who could understand Hausa, he felt threatened because the training looked in some way. But the import I got from there was that at that time, it was like everybody, all the Kayes that were running from the north here, of course, a lot of them, it was the ethnic conflict. And then also the ecology is not that good. But the general understanding was just that they're running away from home. And once they get some skills training, and once you give them some seed money, either in tools or fiscal cash, they would be able to make a living. And Edward was like, I'm not sure that explains everything, because I know that where a lot of these girls come from, if you were to learn this tie and dye that they're teaching them, or you become a seamstress to sew things, or you become a hairdresser, or in any aspect of beauty therapy, he said, you would live for, even in Tamale, you might stay for a week before you get one hair to dress. And it might be difficult to have a livelihood. And if you stress on people going back to the rural areas, I think we should consider other alternatives. And that was what happened. In the end, after the training, they agreed to give the girls, you know, some tools. They readily collected it, you know, and the information we got later was that they hired buses and sent them to Tamale. And some of the girls actually came back to Accra earlier than the entourage that escorted them, you know, because they just took the implements and the tools and they never worked. And I was very impressed because that was somebody who showed understanding of the procedure that we should use to do things. The other one I want to mention is in 2015 when I assisted him together with Professor Widoba and Dr. Benjamin Kwanzaa to undertake some research for UNICEF on menstrual hygiene management in Ghana, because it had been part of the WASH program, and WASH in schools they call it WINS. It wasn't as impressive. And the essence was that if they improved WASH management, especially in northern parts of Ghana and other rural districts, attendance of girls to schools would be encouraged, and then retainment would also be higher, because then they would have the basic facilities. And true, the research really showed that because they have issues when they are menstruating, and because the school doesn't have a supportive environment, it's easier for them to get home. And some of them come, Zabzugu, for example, a lot of them came from villages that were like 6 kilometers away. So every day they would travel 6 kilometers and then travel 6 kilometers or up to even 6 miles back home. And that was already a problem. So added to this, it was going to be, difficult. And so we did that. But from our training sessions at the university here, we had consultants from Emory University, because they were consultants to UNICEF, and another lady from the UNICEF headquarters in New York. And we spent so many hours doing, this armchair training, because they said that there was some validation of those instruments by, the GES had what they call school health educational program. I'm sure, SHEP. And the SHEP, agents or, community school leaders were those that were chosen to try the schedule, that is the interview schedule. And that they had approved and said it was something. But when we looked at it, one day Eddie said, no, this thing that we're dealing with, it's not going to fit. And one of the concerns was that even consent forms and other things, we were to go to the schools directly through female teachers. And out of 67 teachers we encountered, I led the Zabzugu research group, there was no single female qualified teacher in the whole of Zabzugu district. There were 3 females, younger ones that had been employed to be supply teachers, for some temporal period. And so it came to reason that we had done so much of field entry from an office, rather than looking at how it will look like from the field. And so when we went to Zabzo, it was another thing trying to ask the teachers, how do you deal with the females, another thing. It turns out that when girls have problems, it is actually their male teachers that they consult. And that is not as bad or secretive as it is. Alternatively, some of them would consult the boys. And that's what we thought, that in an environment where you don't have, female teachers, the likelihood is that the men would be stepping in that. And in the investigations, I remember we later had some issue with UNICEF, because they are rural schools, and the age cohorts you find there are far higher than you would find in the urban schools. And so some of the girls said they have boyfriends, and the boyfriends help them both in school and outside. And they help them sometimes to procure menstrual material because they didn't have money. And so we explained this, and UNICEF's notion was that there was then some reciprocity, and they were exchanging sex for this, and asked us to do an analysis, expanded analysis to include it. And we flatly refused, and Edward was actually, very serious about this. We refused to do that because our analysis didn't show that there was any connection. And the extent to which we questioned the pupils, we couldn't pretend that we had more detail to put into the report. And here again in Zabzugu, I was there twice before I did, but I went with him to do the validation workshop. And there again, he just showed, the extent to which, he was highly rounded and enlightened as far as field work was concerned, especially with people who did not speak the same language as we do. Not that I didn't have that idea, but he would always insist that this is not something we should consider. It's not worth. And it takes somebody who actually has experienced a lot of these things to be able to make that decision. And so we did other things, including the Ghana Gas project now, but I think we will leave that for another day. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, so if you were present yesterday, those who were present yesterday at the ceremony in the evening, you remember the director acknowledging that the Ghana Gas project in particular was a personal, effort by, Dr. Nanbigne. But just the last year, December, the first 2 weeks of December, until she's not here. I think we left on 28th November, the late Dr. Nanbigne, Nteusu, and myself, because the study involves two components. It's first about a multitude of teams on secondary Takoradi as a metropolis. But we also have a micro-study of a tribal gas enclave. That is the first deliverable according to our, proposal. The second would be a picture book, which we would present to Ghana Gas. But the deliverables we given to them would be technical reports. If at any time they want to improve it, maybe, and they think we should be part. At the institute's level, we would then go further to be able to develop the teams either into a book or to get a special issue of an article. And basically, it's like for several years now, over 5 decades, not much, well, people have written, but there's no comprehensive study of secondary Takoradi as a metropolis. And we know historically that it is one of the urban areas that has grown so fast. We know secondary Takoradi also to have a lot of cultural heritage and arts. And so the idea is that we have so many faculty here who are involved in it. I am working, for example, with Dr. Peter Na on the environmental impacts. Dr. Pius Siakwa and Dr. Eric Lawe are looking at the economic livelihoods and the effects of, for example, the oil and gas. And then Dr. Nteusu looking at the historical aspect. Dr. Njiba looks at some aspects of governance. And then Edem Adote together with Eddie. I don't know whether you were part of it. Also looking at leisure, including the Vienna City Activity Hub. So it's a broad thing, and it's because he belongs to a hockey club, Citizens, a very good fraternity, and you could see from yesterday who would stand solidly behind each other. And he told us that for years he's been talking to the current CEO to say that, you people are always looking at technical things. The technical things are not the solutions to all that society has to deal with. So let us look at the social and human artistic dimensions of these issues. And that is how come, In fact, there was even a third deliverable. We're supposed to do, the daughter is doing something on entertainment, leisure and a number of things. And Genevieve, on religion. Genevieve is looking at how, religious activities are impacting on the coastal stretch following, the expansion of the city and making it complex. So basically, he and Adote and Nteusu were also looking at this aspect of leisure and the history of the kind of, nightlife that they have in secondary Takoradi. Before I forget, I was just going to say that in the proposal, the third deliverable was the documentary, but the budget was cut. And so from the beginning, I think generally we just dropped that. And so it's an opportunity that has been given to many faculty to be part of it, and it will enhance the research and publication profile, God willing, like the director said some time ago. And it is a project that has come to stay. We hope so. The director wrote a formal letter to them. Yesterday I talked with one of them. We are sure that it's because of his schedules. So they are aware that we have changed, the management leadership of the project. But we assured them that we would deliver, the tenets of what originally we had said, and that we wouldn't disappoint them. And I think for that, we all know Dr. Nambigne's efforts in getting it here, and the efforts it's using to get the coordination done. Sometimes it's not easy when you're dealing with your colleagues, but I'm not sure he's reported anybody yet to the director, or we've had any kind of fracas. And we do hope, like we said in some of the tributes too, that those things that are left undone, we would, as much as possible, try to do it, in his memory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you are as excited and informed as I am about what's going on in the Institute and Dr. Edward Nambigne's contribution, inspiration of it. We're going to move into the session where people make a contribution, and I had promised Dr. Deborah Atobra that she would be allowed to take like 3-4 minutes to share work that NUFU project has, the work that they with Dr. Nambingne, and I hear that there are several NUFU people who were on the NUFU project in the audience online, I believe, and we're hoping that Dr. Christine Opong will be able to join us. I'm not very sure if she's on, but she really wanted to say something. So we will take those kinds of contributions, and anybody else who had worked with Dr. Nambiggne to begin with. If you have questions and comments, please hold on to them for a little while longer. So may I ask Dr. Deborah Atobra to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sutherland. And I have to apologize. I can't show my video because I cannot trust. So I speak as a co-beneficiary of the Norwegian-funded NUFU projects, on which Eddie and a number of us did a PhD on. And this was under the director, Teshua Menu, and then coordinated by Professor Christine Opong. The project was entitled Care, Globalization, and the Change, and several of us were on, and we all looked at various aspects of care and globalization and how cultures of care have changed over time. Migration in the northern sector. So I think he worked specifically in the Upper West, in his hometown, in the Sankana area. We had the opportunity to present in seminars. We had many seminar presentations here at the University of Ghana, and then sometimes when we traveled to Bergen. And it was always very insightful to hear Eddie present his work. And at the time, for those of us who had never been to northern parts of Ghana, it was such a very critical time to learn about northern Ghana and also not just to learn about things which were happening at the time, but then the history. Eddie will tell us about how environmental changes and migration has resulted in health hazards, for instance, because there were no more cow dung, which was used to plaster buildings or floors at the time to insulate, buildings and houses, and to prevent people from getting infected with pneumonia. And there was so much to learn from his presentations all the time. And I know yesterday we also heard about his storytelling. And so he often told us stories about goats, and sometimes some of these we would just laugh off. I think generally his for the elderly in the Upper East region. I can reflect on his creativity with methodology, and he used such, for us, a novel methodology of collecting data through gossip, and some of it, at the instance, it wouldn't make sense.
Hello, Deborah.
Yeah,
It's not her fault.
someone's my, I think it's Solis. Okay, so I'm still here. So what I was saying relates to Eddie's creativity with research approach, and particularly research methodology, and how he utilized all kinds of non-traditional means, non-traditional in the sense of, the literature on methodology, but then in the local traditional sense, it really did make a lot of meaning to, for instance, collect data through gossip. So that was really interesting. After that, personally, I worked with Eddie on, we collected some songs from Krobo area where I had done my master's research at the time. And these were clamor songs. And then we worked with the Ghana Dance Ensemble to curate these songs into performances. Of course, I do not have any background in performance. And so it was mainly these, ideas and inputs that helped to actually put all of it together to curate the performances, which became, very popular at the time. It was shown to students from the School of Performing Arts. And when our collaborators from Bergen also came, they also watched, and many people enjoyed it. I know we have talked a lot about Eddie's kindness, and I try to think of it also in terms of how he embodied epistemology, and in relation to the literature and the engagements we had on the subject of care, and how he, as a scholar of care, also actually exemplified what he had actually written about and presented and shared and discussed. And so I thought that was also how he, the epistemic embodiment of his work in relation to care. Not too long ago, I think last week when I was at the ASA conference, and just like we are doing now, a lot of his mentees talked about his intellectual generosity. And then now, yesterday and today, as we celebrate Eddie and his work, I also reflect generosity and reflect more broadly about this whole idea of intellectual generosity and how much of this we appreciate in the academy, not just appreciate, but also support and probably acknowledge also ways in which it could make some members vulnerable in some ways. And so how do we provide support? I think we haven't fully discussed, we haven't fully studied, we haven't fully understood what it means and how it may impact and how it may be undervalued or whatever. But I think that from my engagements last week and yesterday and today, it's coming very strong that it's probably an area that we probably need to interrogate some more. And my own work has taken me into some of the discussions also of intellectual mothering. And I have looked at it in terms of, gender work and in relation to women and all of that. But last week, as I have said, I heard about Harry Garuba, and we are talking about Edward right now. And I'm thinking again, intellectual mothering, how it transcends beyond the sexes, as a concept. And have we fully engaged the concepts as such? Or probably then, would it be called something else instead of mothering if it transcends beyond the sexes? So these are, kind of questions that I'm thinking about and reflecting on in relation to Eddie and his work and his life and what he stood for. I've said that some of my colleagues are here. I know Dr. Jani is here, Professor Bawa Adam is also on the platform. Professor Christine Opon joined. I think her internet was bumpy, she dropped, but she's not using her own name, so I can believe that she's still on. She said she had a new device which she had never used. And anyway, so some of my colleagues are here on the platform, and I'm sure they may share also how Eddie supported all of us. It was like a big brother to us on the project, especially with respect to, coaching us about our travels, how to prepare for our travels, because many of us had never traveled. Had to make our first trip to Bergen. So, like we have all testified, he was a very caring person to us. He hosted our colleagues from northern Ghana whenever they are in Accra, Cuthbert, Bawa, and Awalu, and all of that. And we celebrate him. We are proud of what he stood for, and he will forever be missed. Thank you very much, Professor Daland.
Thank you, Dr. Tobra. Right. So we have a number of eminent personalities that might want to say something. So I'm just going to ask Professor Christian Opong, are you there, please? She's not on. Okay. All right. Well, she's been trying to get on, so we'll see. As soon as we catch her, we'll let her have the floor. We have the first occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah chair, Professor Kofi Anyidoho, who's hiding way back in the corner there, but we saw him and we've gone to find out whether he had a few things to say, and he's agreed generously to say a few words. He was supposed to have been with us yesterday, but had a prior appointment. Can somebody please take the mic, please? Yeah.
Obviously, this is not a happy occasion for all of us, but it is an important occasion. Some of us can remember him from when he came in as a graduate student, and the opportunity for him to travel out to acquire further studies, his return to join us, and the roles, the many roles he has played, especially in the research agenda of the Institute and beyond the Institute, the university, the larger university community. And we were hoping that as it's time for us, and it's been time for a while for us to fade off, we could look behind us and find people like him on whom we can count for the work here to go forward. When I first heard about his passing, I said, no, this is not supposed to be, but you had to accept it as a reality. It's comforting. I just came in, but the tribute that was being paid to him, not only in the capacity of our younger colleague as an individual, but as a whole group, it is comforting to hear that kind of tribute. He may have gone literally too soon, but the impact he has had on colleagues, both older, his own generation, and those coming behind him, clearly is a testimony that he did not play around. I was always impressed with his calm demeanor and his seriousness in whatever assignment given to him or that he took on himself. So all I can say is that, yes, it's sad, he's left us, but the burden is on those of us he's left behind to continue the work that he shared in with us, the work that he has inspired those for whom he was a leader, a model, to continue. Special prayers will go to the family, both immediate and distant, that the Creator will give them some comfort, that the children will grow up strong and vibrant, although he may no longer be there to guide them. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Niruhu. Okay, so we again checking Professor Pong. Okay, people are using various devices without names. That's why sometimes you can't tell. All right, so now we would like to open the floor for comments, brief tributes, questions to our panelists. So the floor is open. Thank you. Dr. Frey, what, please?
Thank you very much. Prof, can I go?
Please, go ahead.
Hello, Prof. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, my voice. No, I just wanted to, first of all, thank everybody for their contributions. I think they were very insightful, and they painted a multidisciplinary academic who that really valued um, connecting the academy to the community, and I'm very in line with that and excited about Eddie's work and sort of the totality of his academic career. And so I'm wondering for the panelists or just anyone who worked with him closely, working with him, did it transform or change the way that you viewed your relationship to research? And I would just like to get some thoughts about sort of moving forward. Is there anything that you will portfolio that you learned from Dr. Nanbigne? Thank you.
Dr. Frey, what can you say the last thing again, please? Just the very last part of what you said.
Oh, sorry. So I'm just asking if anybody, if the panelists or anyone who worked very closely with him would like to share how working with him transformed their, research portfolio, and if there's anything that they'll take and that now implement into their research moving forward.
Thank you very much. We take a couple and then we come back. Sadat, is that you? Please speak.
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof. It's been a while. I just want to say just a few words. I got to know Dr. Nanbigne, a senior colleague, through Dr. Ntobusu, and I am writing my thesis on oil in the state formation of Ghana. And so when I got to know he was on the Ghana Gas project, it was very insightful. And then he told me that he was going to help me with some of the things that I need, only to hear early this year through Dr. Ntobusu that he's passed on. So I was very saddened, and I just want to find out from senior members what are the opportunities you're going to give some of us young scholars to look at some of the works that he's done or the current teams that we're working on. Thank you, and may he rest well.
Thank you very much, Professor Adoma Kwampofu.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone on the panel. I first encountered Eddie as a student in my research methods class, and I think that as a young research fellow, I was, what's the best description? I was less patient and understanding of my students and how to communicate my craft with them. And a few of them struggled with research methods. But Eddie always managed. He always managed to perform, to understand, and to share what with his colleagues what they may have been struggling with. But the question that I have to the panelists is, maybe to you, Prof. Sutherland Addy, you and Eddie were working on collecting stories. And I wonder if there's one particular story or one particular encounter as you were collecting the stories that stands out for you as we remember Eddie. And for the rest of the panelists, I know Eddie worked on food and drink cultures in diverse ways. I mean, he would regale us in the senior common room with a lot of the snippets from his research/personal encounters. And if anyone has one of those narratives to share with us, I would be particularly heartwarmed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm going to come back. I don't know if anybody wants to take up. Perhaps Dr. Osman, can you take up the one about, the last one where he was talking about, how to integrate students into the project that you're doing. And then any of the two of you can also pick up on, the impact, his impact on you as far as research methods and so on are concerned. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe there are the conscious parts, and unconsciously also there would be some, impacts. For sure, we are from different disciplinary backgrounds. I remember, if I get back again, one instance I remember, I was coordinator of Calvin College, a year abroad program for Calvin College students. I understand now they are at Cape Coast, Acrophil Crusella. And so I brought in they were dealing with some thematic issues as their main lectures. I know politics was one. I know language was another. Well, I will count them. But beyond that, we had a long list of general topics that we put together, and we called it Societies and Cultures. There were lectures on that. And I brought in Edward to take about 3 years going, the part on migration, especially emphasizing on youth migration. And I think it influenced a lot the way we look at things, because I was sometimes very rigid on theory, rigid on works that were already available. To such an extent that one day I sent him to, I teach a graduate class at the Center for Migration Studies on transnational migration and the diaspora. And everybody was amazed that it was an open seminar, amazed at the lecture he gave about diaspora feelings, and eventually the fact that, science is not all too much about the way we sit and plan things. It's not too much about only peer-reviewed things and the methodologies that have been set for some time, because these things continue to change, especially in human societies that are dynamic. And so for all of us, that influence that, oh, you think, this is your area, you do things this way. The fact that, you should always reflect on the fact that the methodologies you're using can change. It's a very good, impact on the way we do things. And the fact that I still consider theories and publications relevant, but on the other hand, this idea of eavesdropping, which I'm sure he reported that in some presentation at the University of Cape Coast, they said it was ethically and morally wrong, and there's no way a researcher would. And then he asked, who says that, and within which context? I think it just throws up some challenge and makes us all think, have a second, third thought when you are driving, field work, or you are undertaking it, and then you are all glued to these methodologies that we know they've been time tested, and that is what we use. So it makes us reflect sometimes to know that there are others.
Yes, Prof. I want to say that for me in particular, his creativity in, and permit me to use the word conjuring research ideas, things that look rather mundane, okay? So this whole idea about insults as an area of research, and particularly framing it as the performance arts of it, is basically his idea. And indeed, he didn't only do that, but he literally practiced it if you knew when Mira, that scholar from, I think from Edinburgh, yeah, when she came around, yes, these were two widely read scholars, and between the two of them, they just could talk over your head, you know. And particularly when they veered into the literary terminologies and experiences from themes. And it looked so beautiful the way they did it, you know, enjoying the repartee and the banter. And that is where it all came from. Could you imagine? The next thing is about sociology of eating. Okay, and then, you know, his own unfinished work in the protocols of Pito drinking. Unfortunately, this one has not been completed yet. I think that for that particular work, he got this AHP doctoral fellowship to go to Rhodes University. And the part of it that intrigued people the most is that whenever he made the presentation, he would tell them after the theory, after talking the theory, they would go the practical way. And then everybody, hey, so the moment he finished, so where do we start the practical? And that is what he calls the elbow exercise, you know, stuff like that. So this whole creativity of making research and research activities look fun, okay, it's one thing that I'm picking very strongly. It's like don't take research a bit too serious. Don't look for the too serious issues, that it's all around you, the very things that we engaged in. And it's one thing that I forever will remember him for. Thank you.
Yeah, about his influence on me. I think in terms of research, even though we all claim to be very seasoned researchers, one thing that I have learned from him is not assigning specific times to research. So for example, you are done with your interviews. It's 5 o'clock, you retire, you get to your hotel, and maybe. For him, research shouldn't be that way. So when you are even eating, it's a continuation of the research process. And I think also connecting objects to the research. So he did something a bit interesting in my own village, and I was just surprised. As part of this storytelling project, at least I know all the trees in my village. So he shouldn't tell me under which tree we should conduct the research. So early in the morning, we were ready, and I said, okay, we'll sit here. He said, no, we'll sit under this tree. I'll tell you where we'll go and sit. And he walked right up at the outskirts, went to the primary school I attended, and there was a tree. And he said, this is where we are going to conduct the research. And I said, okay, no problem. We'll bring the informants. And he said, no, we'll first bring a pot of pito, not the informants. So it's like he was a step ahead of me in my own village. And it was when the pito came. Usually he broke a kind of traditional protocol. We're supposed to be done with the interviews before we drink. That is, in my culture, what should pertain. But he said we should begin drinking before the whole process. And we came out with amazing stories that I myself never heard in the village, because the whole atmosphere was so liberalized that everybody could participate. Children could cut in to even correct the elderly if they were going wrong. And for me, that was something that I really learned from him. So taking your environment and not restricting yourself to things, and allow maybe the environment to dictate what you should do. This is what I picked and learned from him.
Thank you so much. Professor Kusiampofu, I will answer you, but let's take a few a few people. Yeah. Okay. So Professor Tichua Menu, please.
Thank you, Bessie. I see Sewa Africa has a hand up. I'll let her go first, then I'll come in after her.
Okay, Sewa. Hello. Sewa, if you're there, can you unmute and speak, please? Okay, Professor Menu, I think you can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll come in. So, thank you very much, Essie, and all the panelists, and good afternoon, everybody. And I'm especially happy to see so many people that I haven't seen or heard in a long time, who were contemporaries of Eddie, who are online. Sarah Zani, a whole lot of you. So hello to all of you. So I'm listening to this with very mixed feelings, like most of us, a mixture of sadness, but also a lot of pride in what we are doing with Eddie, and honoring his memory and his achievements. I met Eddie shortly after I returned from study leave when he was a graduate student, and I remember him in the old block. And also I remember very well the research methods class that Akosia taught and the issues that arose around it and Eddie's own role in it, where even at that early stage, he showed a lot of leadership and getting him into the institute and following his career. So as I've listened this morning, a number of issues have come up for me. Nidote just raised the issue of not taking things too seriously, not like a relaxed style. And Sam Inteosu just mentioned this inimitable way that Eddie had about establishing his research milieu and context. And the question that it raises for me is not about forgetting about theory, but really to raise the question about where does theory come from? Where should we be getting our theories from? That is it in the context in which we work, the milieux in which we work, and really theorizing from our own context, or as Langwa was suggesting in his piece, still getting into this way of taking what other people have produced and trying, usually unsuccessfully, to fit it to what we do. So listening to all of you, I thought that a lot of issues about theory, about policy, about practice, gender, language, knowledge, power, and resources came up. And I particularly like the Osman's recounting of the UNICEF work that they did. And the fact that we trivialize the knowledge of the people that we talk to all the time. We assume that they really do not know what they want, and we do not respect what it is that they're doing. But also, we need to do a little more in publicizing our own work, and showing really their connectedness to not just the lives of other people, but even to the policies that our governments try to make. So I was right in the usefulness of the useless. I mean, people think African studies, oh, what do they have to contribute to anything? We are trying to solve our macroeconomic issues, and these people are just talking about culture and tradition, etc. And yet, I think that listening to the panel, it has raised very, very concretely all these issues. Eddie's and Osman's insights about all these projects for girls, for Kayaye, returning them to their villages, giving them skills, and then the very right comment that in a week they would not have found anybody's hair to make. So how is it that these insights are not sinking into any policymakers' heads, and we keep repeating these things that we do? I think Nidote mentioned the ethical issues around eavesdropping, and I was thinking about the work of Shagba the Hist in Kwewu, and you know, he made a lot out of gossip and lies that he picked up in his field work. And it reminded me of my own field work. One day I had gone and done an interview in a village, and my research assistant sat quietly, and we interviewed a woman who told me her life history, how many children she had, etc. When we were done for the day, the research assistant says to me, I know that woman. Everything she told you were lies. It's not true that she has got 3 children. She has got 5 children, 7 children, etc. So who am I to substitute what this woman has presented to me of her life for what this research assistant is now telling me of their life? So this issue about what you do with gossip and lies and eavesdropping, etc., all these so-called ethical issues in research, they really are fascinating. You know, what is fact, what is data, what is the role of imagination or, you know, wishes in anybody's life. So I think that as I reflect, we have a very rich legacy that Eddie has left us. And this unfinished work, the work, the different things with Dr. Ntewusu, the different things with Dr. Osman, the different things with Dr. Nidote, I think that that is going to be a real contribution. I remember that Imarola Champo and I think Tom McCaskey finished the manuscript that Prempe the First had put together in the Seychelles, okay, as the true whatever of the history of Asante, etc. I think now that the real work that we need to do in the Institute, and this is where Langwa and the gentleman who is working on oil and gas, Adamu, Sadat, all of you can come in. The true legacy is really going to be in picking up all these unfinished projects and for the Institute to find funds and to make the resources available. When I say resources, I don't mean financial, people like Professor A.C. Sutherland, Adi, etc., contributing to make sure that all these projects get finished, and this will be a lasting legacy to the memory of Dr. Edward Nanbigne. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Menu, and thank you for also doing my work for me. So you've done a very good conclusion. So when it comes to my final remarks, I won't have too much to say. Okay, Sewa, are you there? Doctor?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank the leadership of the Institute for putting this together in memory of Dr. Nanbigne. And I have never sat in his class as a student, but during my doctoral program, he was our graduate coordinator. And I had not actually paid attention to the fact that he had also done something on care, because I know his area is literature. But I just walked in his office and he had an informal conversation with me where he said, "Go to the library and look at my doctoral thesis." And he was also kind enough to share 2 books with me. And as he took those books off his shelf in the office for me, he gave me a sheet to write when I was taking mine. And I realized that it had like a long list of people who had also borrowed books from his shelves. And most of these people were his students and students of the Institute. And I found that to be very kind of him. And he never requested those books until I submitted my work. And then again, apart from that, I used to go for conferences. Sometimes I needed funding. I approached him and he said, maybe you can write to the director. And he was really instrumental in helping me access funds from the Institute to attend a conference in Botswana. And the news of his passing is really heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking for all of us, but we are consoled that he left a very good memory and he's done so much, not just for his students and also for his colleagues and the Institute as a whole. So today, my prayer is that his gentle soul will rest in peace. I'm sending my heartfelt condolences to his wife, children, and the rest of the family. And I'm also wishing the Institute my very heartfelt condolences as we all mourn the departure of such a great academic. And so thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much indeed. On that note, I think I'd like to inform our colleagues here, those online would have seen that there are several members of Dr. Nambigne's family online, and they're showing their appreciation. His daughter and his son are here with us. Could you stand for us to acknowledge you, please? Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. So now the time is almost up, and I don't know if anybody has any burning question, issue. Yes, Director.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and colleagues. For me, this has been a hugely emotional but educative experience. Most of you have known Dr. Nanbigne for much longer than I have known him. I knew of him, but I only got to know him when I came to this institute about 6 years ago. And what has struck me most about this conversation is that he's not a person who's easy to pigeonhole. When I look at the range of issues that he brought his attention to bear on, and this idea that he thought that research could be done from the ordinary, I find it very striking because it seems to me that for that reason he asked some of the biggest questions that we could be asking as researchers. What it is to be human, what it is to connect with people, what it is to understand people and their trajectories and so on. And these large questions are the questions that basically underlie most of the research we do, which tends to be a bit more specific. And so I feel very strongly that Dr. Nambigne's intellectual history should be the subject of a research agenda. I don't know whether we can encourage some PhD students to do this or to encourage his colleagues and collaborators to undertake something like this, because I think this is important for our institute. The institute sometimes, I feel, has not quite made a whole lot of what it has offered to African studies. In this world these days, when everybody is talking about a decolonial turn, all sorts of newcomers are making their mark and making claims about what they've contributed to African studies. I sometimes feel that our own traditions of African studies, which predated many of these new fads, has not been quite made explicit and clear. So I would really like to propose that as an institute, we take this matter seriously, that we could do it by beginning to record the intellectual histories of people like Dr. Nanbigne. And since we are talking so much about his work and his influence on many of us in this room, it may be a good place to start. So this is what I just wanted to contribute. We will miss him a lot. He basically, the Institute is much the poorer for his absence, but we should make it count by making sure that his works are not forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director, for pointing us a way forward. as leader of this team, you've brought up issues that I think we have to take up. Now, it's very close to the end. I'd like to ask if, for panelists to take like a minute or less to say something to round off. Please pass it over.
Maybe I just should say this, that I had the privilege of being called upon by his brother, direct brother, Dr. Victus Nanbigne, to do a tribute, a 500-word tribute. And in the many things I wrote, in concluding some of the things I wrote, all I could say is that, like the proverbial, he may be gone forever, but like the proverbial African old lady, his tongue may never see decay. And that's where I want to end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to finally add that out of all of the issues that we have raised, that Dr. Edward Nanbigne enlightened each and every one of us on, I think that one thing that also needs some highlighting is the issue of knowledge, the mode of output for knowledge, and its dissemination. So to a very large extent, it is possible to see that in such a multidisciplinary environment, Dr. Nanbigne was able to use the non-traditional means available to him to disseminate information and to, make sure that research actually filters through the fabric of what the institute is supposed to be as a multidisciplinary space. And I think that that sort of highlights a point on, if ultimately print media is always the best way, to make knowledge travel as fast as possible. And if knowledge is what it's supposed to be, it may appear from my understanding that the print media is sort of like camouflages or probably suffocates the diffusion of knowledge, across the spaces that are available. So I think that in some ways, maybe the Institute as a multidisciplinary space can think about considering other innovative ways of disseminating the knowledge that is being produced by all of the dozens of scholars that we have over here. How many scholars actually do know about each other's works, beyond what Dr. Nanbigne has demonstrated, being able to, reflect on how to produce knowledge, reflect on the findings of knowledge that he has, found out, that he has taken from the field. And then all of these things happen, as Dr. Nidote mentioned, in the very traditional or non-traditional spaces, not in this conference room, but during elbow exercises and what have you. So I think that it's important to question this, within the institute and make sure that we can consider some of these innovations in order to propel the knowledge that is supposed to be propelled, for the greater gain of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't have much to say, but it's difficult to separate his social and other lifestyles from the academic lifestyle. And even as we're talking of, promoting the academic work he hasn't finally completed, like Prof. Techuamenu's intimated and the director gave a lead, I think I would only say that we should be committed to try and exemplify what we say about him by coming together to complete those things. As I said before, Eddie was a kind person, tolerant, he was very accommodating and human like any of us. So those of us who even got influenced by him, we all have split personalities. It's not everything we took, but put together, like I said, it was just all-rounded, that some of us wish you could have some of those qualities too. And so now that Atlas is not around, we would try to just leave that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say it's a period of deep reflection and also a time to plan the way forward to project Eddie's works. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I probably make my final remarks. Professor Adumakwa-Mpofu, there's so many stories that we loved together, but I think basically we were excited about finding stories of resistance and counter-hegemonic stories, stories that projected characters that we were unfamiliar with, like we were trying to identify monsters, for example, you know, with 7 eyes and you know, horrible, yeah, as horrible as possible. And we're thinking about how to get people to draw them, so that we could put them on the web. We want to start a website, so we put, you know, and have a challenge about what Anansi really looks like and so on. But we really we were surprised at the variety of characters that have not been projected and highlighted. The enfant terrible, the little child who is greater than everybody else. But I think I'll quickly, you know, massacre a story about women, because we were looking for that as well. And there was a story that we found from a Fanti story where a couple, you know, had been looking for a child, and a Malam came to their town, and the Malam promised them that they would have a child. It would be a boy, but he could never have sex, otherwise he'd die. And and so they hid him and tried to keep him away from women and so on. But there was a wonderful festival that came up in the town, and this lovely lady came waltzing in from another town, and from his hideout, you know, in an upstairs building and so on, he was able to see her and throw down a rope for her to come up. And they had sex, and then she went down and out, and he fell down dead. And so when they came, the parents came, the child was dead. And the Malam showed up immediately after the child died and said, "You see what I told you? So anyway, I can help you. So set up a whole, you know, funeral pyre, set up firewood, put your son in there, and let's light the fire. And the person who can bring the son out of the fire, you know, if you bring him out, I'll bring him back to life." So the fire was raging, and all kinds of apparently brave people were trying to, as soon as they get near the fire, they go back. And so the parents, the father went, he couldn't do it. The mother tried to go in, and at that time, they could hear some singing. This young woman had heard about the death of the boy, and was coming, and as soon as she got there, she lifted up her cloth, you know, up to her thighs. She plunged into the fire and brought the boy out, and you know, and then the Malam brought him to life. And the story ends with the idea that this is why men leave their parents and stick to their wives. And of course, I loved it, you know, but it's there are stories like that in the system which go counter to the idea that all our stories are promoting a certain hegemonic, you know, culture. I hope I've answered your question. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so as I said, our contributors have made a whole lot of suggestions. First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing a bit of their experiences. I'd like to thank Professor Menu, Dr. Tobra, our director, and various people who have made suggestions about you know, what we should try to do to keep the legacy alive. This is wonderful legacy. It's a challenging legacy. Being the daughter of two very great activists and so on, I know exactly what it feels to have the legacy hanging over you. Sometimes you kind of wish that you were the one who was hanging it hand over somebody else to work on, because it's quite difficult. But I think that if we are focused, we should be able to bring out some results within a short time. So perhaps we should set up a structure, some kind of a grouping that moves on immediately from here, to try and set some targets and work towards them. As far as the project on expressive cultures is concerned, we've got two book-length projects ready with articles that will be going to press. We've got a website that we are working on. I don't want to share. I'm sure that if I start talking about what happens with ORID, we'll all understand about releasing of the funding for it. And we've got a documentary film that is in play. In fact, some of the material that we watched yesterday is from the documentary film that we're trying to do. So hopefully we should have some concrete outputs very, very soon. I'd like to just comment on a couple of ideas. One is the point of respecting ourselves as knowledge bearers and and researchers when people come in from outside. That resistance that he had to people coming and trying to tell us what to do and so on. It's very, very important not to accept to be put under people who know much less than you do about your own community and so on. And I think that kind of resistance must continue, and it must be we must uphold what we know and who we are. So that's something that I think I would like to emphasize. And then I just want to thank the members of the committee that worked on this two-day event in honor of Dr. Nanbigne. Please, could the members of the committee stand up, please? Please, please, please. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Everybody willingly did a lot of work. Where is Mark Anthony? Yeah, in the back there. Of course, the entire administration was at our disposal. Our quiet Mr. Asari is, but he was very, very helpful. And we had help from other people. Kwame Krenzel, please, helping us with the film and with the the banners and the various things. And where is Dr. Adote is not here. Maybe he's teaching, but we want to thank him very much as well. All right, so I think we're done, and done but not done now. We're suspending and then going into gear again very soon. Dr. Chika.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you for obliging us once again, a second time in as many weeks. And a lot has gone down already. Just to thank everyone again for making time to join another of our event. Yes. The audiovisual people have just been wonderful. I mean, the crew has, had to deal with so many technical challenges and have come up on top of the situation for the day as usual. So thank everyone and for making our time to joining us, and looking forward to another event next week. It will be another panel discussion on Mario Nisbe's book on the Jamaican Maroons, the claims to sovereignty. As usual, those online, if you want to unmute for just a minute or two to say hi to people, is allowed, and then we can end the meeting.
Sorry, before we go there, I've been reminded that we need to announce the actual funeral, which is on the 29th and 30th of this month, and going to take place in Sankana, isn't it? Yes, okay. So I know there'll be an official delegation, but this is to just let you know what is going to be happening, okay?
So we have like 2 minutes or less for people who are online. If you want to say hi, then we can close the proceedings. Okay, so we are ending.
Well, thank you for a great program.
Hello, right.